So this is a Labour member of the UK Parliament, Nadia Whittome, who is basically going after Israel, saying that the world needs to isolate Israel, stop her from ever being able to defend herself, and seems to have very little regard for the hostages or for Israel's justified need to defend itself and get rid of Hamas. But she's called out by Camilla Tominey, a British journalist, who challenges her firmly and clearly. And I want you to watch this dialogue because this is a case of moral clarity being injected into a conversation that seems to be, from Natalie's perspective, showing utter moral bankruptcy. Have a watch.
Israel has blatantly violated international law. What the UK needs to
How? Blatantly how? In what sense?
do now is hold Israel to account. And we have not just a moral duty, but also a legal duty to do that. And that means a full arms embargo, sanctions like those that we have rightly put on Russia. It means no longer providing diplomatic cover to Israel at the UN.
She means it basically means the end of Israel, which means that all the Jews get to be killed. Just to be clear, that's what she's would happen if that's what the world did. Let's just be clear about that. Sorry to keep interrupting, but have to state that. Watch the clip now, and I'll keep talking at the end.
We've got to stand up to the Israeli government and not allow these far-right politicians to do this in the world, or international law ceases to mean anything, and that harms all of us.
Who stands up for the hostages in your scenario? Who stands up for the Israeli people? Who stands up for the mothers and fathers that saw their children brutally murdered in front of them on October the 7th? Who stands up for the women who were raped before they were brutally murdered by Hamas terrorists? It's such a one-sided view, this. Why isn't the word genocide ever used about Hamas's behaviour on October the 7th?
No, it's not a one-sided view.
It is.
Absolutely. I have, from the very beginning, called for the hostages to be returned. What do you think bombing Gaza... No, let me ask you this. How does bombing Gaza help the hostages?
How does keeping the hostages help the Gazan people? That's the part of the ceasefire deal. It's been very clear that Israel's got a right to defend itself, as have all countries. A terrorist atrocity was carried out on October the 7th. As part of the ceasefire deal, the hostages were meant to be returned. Some of the hostages that were meant to be returned were actually killed in captivity. We now know how some of the hostages were kept in captivity. Until those hostages are returned, there can be no ceasefire at all. I'm not advocating the slaying of women and children in Gaza.
But you're advocating for it to continue.
No, what I'm saying is that there is never any dialogue from you and people like you who are constantly banging on about...
What do you mean, people like me?
People like you who are accusing the Israelis of genocide without taking any responsibility.
People like Amnesty International, like the UN Special
People like you, Nadia, without actually acknowledging...
No, say what you really mean by that.
I'm saying exactly what I mean, which is why don't you acknowledge the genocide that has been carried out by Hamas against the Israeli people and also at the harm of their own people? This is a terrorist organisation that has been using Palestinians as human shields.
Hamas, I've unequivocally...
You didn't in the original thing that you said. It was all very one-sided.
The very first thing I said...
Yeah, well, let Nadia
consistent. I condemn both. Why don't you?
But Nadia, do you think the hostages should now be released? Would that then...
Obviously, I've said again and again that they should be released. Of course they should.
If they are released, that takes away from Hamas's perspective any part that they can use in negotiations. Has the Israeli bombardment, restarting airstrike, put those hostages' lives at risk?
I think the point is that how can the Israelis position themselves if they've still got their own people in captivity in Gaza? What is Netanyahu meant to do? What's he meant to turn around and say to the families of those hostages?
Why doesn't he listen to the families? Because the families are calling for this to end. Okay, not just for the Palestinian people, but also for their own loved ones who are being kept as hostages.
Why does Hamas continue to allow the Palestinian people to be used as human shields within their own territory?
Well, I'm not one here as a spokesperson for Hamas.
Well, let's hope nobody is.
But I've condemned them over and over again. Nadia, when will you condemn the Israeli government for its genocide of the Palestinian people?
Because I don't think I don't agree with you that it's international law. I don't agree with the language of genocide.
OK, you don't have to agree that it's genocide.
Israel is defending its own territory against a prescribed terrorist group. I'd like to know why nobody seems to call out the fact that the hostages are still there and that Hamas... If we have all of this talk about we must free Palestine. Free Palestine from whom? The Israelis or the Hamas terrorist captors, because the people who are really damaging the people of Gaza right now are Hamas.
It's both.
It's not acknowledged, and it's not acknowledged fully enough in debates like this.
Okay, so God, there's a lot to unpack there, and good for Camilla for going up and being strong and calling out the lies and the nonsense from Nadia's side. First of all, let's just be clear, and I'm going to be strong about this in stating this clearly, so it's very, very clear for you. She's saying, I condemn both. I'm the good one here. I condemn both sides of aggression. That would be no different than saying when Britain went to war against Nazi Germany, well, I don't support what the Nazis are doing. I don't support their acts of aggression, but I don't support Britain either. I don't support Britain going after the Nazis. That is a fair, accurate comparison. So she acts like she's the good person here. What she's calling for at the start of that video, she's saying, Hamas, yeah, they're bad, but Israel's terrible as well, and therefore we should isolate them. We should not do any, arms deals with them, and the whole world should diplomatically isolate them. That would be calling for the end to Israel, because she is surrounded by people that wish to annihilate her. And so by doing that, Israel would no longer have the means to defend herself, and God forbid, would lose her existence as a state. God forbid. So actually, she is siding with the Hamas agenda. So let's be utterly clear about that. I think I have no time for people that say, well, I'm just sensible, I condemn both. Netanyahu's evil and so are Hamas, and they make this ridiculous moral equivalence. The second thing is she says, pretending to care about the hostages' lives, and I say pretending because she clearly doesn't seem to care about Jewish people and Israel's lives when she's calling for sanctioning of Israel and isolating Israel, when she is defending herself in a more military precise war and operation than has ever been seen in the history of modern urban warfare. So then she says, well, how does bombing Gaza help the hostages? So first of all, what is she saying? That Israel should just stop and walk away? How's that going to help the hostages? No, the whole approach that makes sense is you put military pressure on your opponents, and then that pressure gets them to release the hostages. She may then say, yeah, well, there are some hostage families who say, no, don't do any of that, because that could risk our family or whoever is a hostage life. To which Israel is forced to reply, well, first of all, we don't see how, there's high risks and moral issues with negotiating with terrorists, the precedence that sets, the way it encourages them to take more to do more acts of terrorism, because it can, we're incentivizing that by negotiating with them. And secondly, to release loads and loads of Palestinian murderers and terrorists in exchange is also highly problematic. So they could be potentially being forced to make concessions that could endanger even more of Israel's security. So the approach of saying that actually military pressure is a sensible, moral way to go, even though it may be risky, is very legitimate. But also, let's not forget that that's not the only objective of the war. The main objective of the war, the primary objective of the war, is to finish off Hamas, to finish off the security threat for future. And anyone that thinks that that isn't legitimate, who thinks that it's wrong, that Israel has no right to do that, as I'm sure Nadia seems to believe, has no regard for Jewish life. And if you say, well, where's your regard for Palestinian life? Excuse me. That would be like saying to me, where's your regard for German life if I supported going after the Nazis? More than that, actually, as Camilla rightly says at the end, she says, free Palestine from whom exactly? Because if I was in one of the minority cases of Arabs in Gaza who didn't buy into the Palestinian agenda, and I just wanted to live in peace, I'd much prefer to have a very different kind of government, or maybe even live in a different part of the world, than have to live in a society that chooses constantly to go to war against the Jews and kill the Jews, which inevitably will lead to Israel responding and there being more war and bloodshed. So everything is totally topsy-turvy, utterly topsy-turvy. And so well done to people like Camilla who stand up to the nonsense. Don't fall for the emotional tactics of saying, how can you support all this war and bloodshed? She has the logic and moral clarity to stand up and realise that these kinds of attempts at trying to silence dissent, to shame people, are not going to work. She tried to do it earlier do you see in the discussion where she said, what do you mean you people? Trying to suggest that she was maybe making some kind of racial remark, or I don't know. They're looking for ways to catch you so they can say, you're the bigots, you're the this, that, the other. And it's all nonsense. So we have to see these clever or not so clever emotional games for what they are and call them out. Because if we don't, they will gain the upper hand. As much as emotional arguments and using emotional language can sway people, more and more people are waking up to reality with just a little injection, a little dose of logical and moral clarity.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.